Hello, from Professor Shave. I do want to remind you again that Chapter 1 is still touching on a lot of points that we will cover in more detail in the coming chapters of the book. So if we look at the forms of user support, what we're looking at here is based on an organization, and on the organization, how do they support their IT area. So we look at initially for computer user support. Is it based on workers within the organization, or is it also based on clients? And clients could be a much bigger support system. And then we have the idea of tech support. But when you talk about tech support, you're looking at a much more advanced set of technicians and much more capability of troubleshooting. So if we take a brief look at these forms: peer support, part-time support, user support team, help desk, a single point of contact. Again, touching on them briefly, the idea of a peer support would be a very small informal organization, and what that really means is that each worker is helping each other worker. In other words, they're not categorized as really IT people, they're just workers helping each other. The idea of a part-time support is, again, the idea of a small organization, and just basically again, this is still informal like peer, but in this reference here, it is saying that they can't really support a full sort of blown IT department, so they might have a small staff. I have placed links below this lecture that have to do with some of these topics, so I do recommend that you look at the links I'm supplying you. The idea of part-time support is now looking at a small business. And again, what you want here is something a little more formal. So a formal work group becoming formalized. And at this point, what happens is it actually becomes part of a person's job description. So literally part of their job. In this case, it may still have an issue that a organization that's small still cannot support a full-blown sort of help desk service, but they can at least start developing that. Now, the idea of a whole team in terms of user support, again, it would depend on the volume. So we can still say it's formal, we can still say it's a large organization, but again, it has to do with the volume. As the volume increases, in that the end user needs technical support, then you start to need more full-time types of services. And that's where you get the idea of a user support type of team. You can also keep in mind here that the idea of outsourcing could come into play here. Again, that'll be talked about more in another chapter. And lastly, if we look at the idea of a full sort of help desk, the idea of help desk is it's a single point of contact, and it could be internal or external, but often the idea is that it may be of actual physical location. Based on that physical location, there's probably literally someone sitting at a desk that when you go in, they are going to take information, and based on the information, that's going to get distributed to a particular type of technical person. So again, it depends on what the issue is. Another part of a help desk could be a telephone hotline, so that you could call in. That sort of gives you a 24/7 type of access if there's someone supporting that. And one of the more popular ones today is having to do with either the idea of email, website, or chat services. And again, that gives you that idea of 24/7, and you're trying to resolve technical issues. But between the telephone and the email, etc., that type of service does not deal with a one-on-one type of personal discussion with someone, and sometimes that's a kind of a lacking part. So the breakdown in terms of this types of support in the user support center, we also have to think about that in terms of what it would support. And again, the concept would be it being able to support a lot more services. So when I say services, it might be, all you have to do is think of a college like Massasoit. Purchases have to be made. These labs have to be built. Well, purchasing becomes an issue. What's the manufacturer? So you can talk about hardware. What do we want for our particular towers in the lab? Do we want Dell? Do we want to go with Macintosh? Someone has to be able to make these decisions. The other kind of thing that would be concerned would be, besides that, would be software and, of course, network support. And in terms of responsibility for IT, it becomes sort of specialized within that. You start breaking it down into different people, different categories. You've got physically, there could be someone right at the help desk taking down information. That person needs to take down information that can be passed on. Even the idea of the chats or the email or the, very often ticketing software is used. Again, information specifics will be brought in based on the user and then based on the equipment and their questions. And again, it has to be parceled out to whoever might have the best knowledge of that particular area. Outsourcing, of course, is a popular method, and sometimes that has to do with the idea of cost. And it becomes sometimes the idea inefficient when you do email and things like that. Plus, the other thing you have to think about outsourcing is that a lot of times the resources that are needed or the problems that are having to be solved are repetitive. So you can supply the outsource area with specific troubleshooting scripts. Again, we will see some of those in another chapter, but a way to work through from the beginning to an end. There are some disadvantages of outsourcing, though, obviously. Again, outsourcing tends to be telephone or email, and it can be expensive to do that. The costs become predictable, but it depends again then on how much support you're going to do in outsourcing. And it also, the idea of outsourcing is to free up other personnel in IT department to, let's say, do more important things, more challenging things. And when the support is outsourced, again, a disadvantage is the idea of that interpersonal relationship between the particular client and the IT person. Sometimes that can be of great value. Okay, stopping now. Next will be user support services.